Salve discipuli. Today we're going to talk about adjectivi tertia declinatio or third declension adjectives and how they agree with their noun in case, gender, and number. In year one, we've already talked about first and second declension adjectives and how they agree with their nouns. And so before we talk about our third declension adjectives, we will take a moment to review first and second declension adjectives as well. And the most important thing to remember about adjectives is that they need to match the nouns that they agree with in case, number, and gender. And it's the adjective that changes to match the noun, since the noun will be in a certain number, case, and gender based on what it's doing in the sentence. So change the adjective to match the noun. For example, puellam and pulcher, pulcra, pulcrum, meaning beautiful, will change to match puellam in case, gender, and number, puellam, pulcram. And then senatore plus pulcher, pulcra, pulcrum, a beautiful senator, would be senatore pulcro. Now, one thing to notice is that sometimes the ending on your adjective and your noun will be exactly the same as with puellam, pulcram. That is because those adjectives belong to the same declension, the same group, but sometimes the adjectives will not have the same ending because they belong to different declensions. Senatore is a third declension noun, but pulcher, pulcra, pulcrum is one of our first and second declension adjectives. So even though the endings may or may not be identical, then adjectives will always agree with their nouns in case, number, and gender. As we already discussed in level 1, adjectives fall into two basic groups: adjectives that take first and second declension endings, and typically you're going to recognize these by their dictionary entries us, a, and sometimes it's an r, a, And then also we have third declension adjectives, which take third declension endings. And you'll recognize these by their nominative endings, their dictionary entries that end in is, a. So take a moment and look at the words on the video right now, and I want you to practice identifying which type of adjective is it. Does it belong to first and second declension, or does it belong to third? Go ahead and pause the video as you identify which group these adjectives belong to based on their dictionary entries. And go ahead and check your word. Flavus, miser, fatuus all belong to first and second declension. They either go us, a, or a, and then fortis, omnis, and viridis all belong to third declension because they go is, a. Before we talk about third declension adjectives, let's do a review of first and second declension adjective endings. And the great thing about first and second adjectives is that these endings are exactly the same as first and second declension nouns for the feminine first declension and then the masculine and the neuter second declension. So we can just practice these endings by singing our noun songs to ourselves, starting with the feminine, which is first declension, going down through all of the singulars, and then going back through for the plurals, we have our song I, rum, is, us, is. That's the first declension. Easy as you please, ha, 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 ha. And of course, a kawete that the ablative singular does have that essential macron, and we need to have that macron, otherwise we won't be able to distinguish it between the nominative or the vocative singular. Now, the masculine and the neuter endings come from this second declension. The masculine endings we do have a song for. So second declension noun endings, declining we will go with usio, umo, e, orum, is, osis. It's second declension, yo. And the neuters, of course, are going to be exactly the same as the masculine, except for in the nominative, accusative, and vocative, where it becomes a ending that gets copied. And then neuter plurals in those three cases, the nominative, accusative, and vocative, will always end in an A. Otherwise, your adjectives in first and second declension take exactly the same endings as your nouns from first and second declensions. So when you're going through and you're making your adjectives agree with your nouns, the first thing you want to do is identify which declension of adjective and which declension of noun you have. So for your nouns, you can have first, second, or third declension. And then for your adjectives, you can either have first and second declension or third. The reasoning behind this is because if your noun and adjective belong to the same declension, then you can just copy that ending. If they don't agree, if they're not of the same declension, then you need to go through the process of finding the case, gender, and number of the noun. And reminder that you want to change the ending of the adjective to match the same case, gender, and number of the noun. We're going to practice by making bonus, bona, bonum, good, agree with the nouns that are on the following examples. And of course, since this goes us, a, we are dealing with an adjective that takes first and second endings. So after each example, pause the video so that you can figure out what form of bonus, bona, bonum agrees with the noun, and then we'll go through the answers together. Your first noun is anchilam. What I notice about the word anchilam is that this word belongs to the first declension because its nominative and genitive endings are A and AE. So I don't actually even think about case, number, and gender when I'm trying to figure out what form of bonus, bona, bonum to match to it. They belong to the same declension, so I know that the form is going to be bonum, and that those endings are going to be exactly the same. Now, if I couldn't recognize that, I would have to go through the process of identifying anchilam as accusative, singular, and feminine, and then finding the correct accusative, singular, feminine ending for my adjectives. A lot easier if you know how to identify the declensions of your nouns and your adjectives, so you can do this little cheat. Your next example is senatorum. Now, unfortunately, this word is a third declension word with that genitive plural ending. So that means that I cannot just copy this ending onto my adjective bonus, bona, bonum. And that is because bonus will only take first and second endings. It can't take a third declension ending. So I do need to think about the case, gender, and number. Senatorum, a in third declension, means that it's genitive and plural, and then senators are usually masculine. So as we match our noun and our adjective, we're going to go to the masculine endings as an option, and then go to the genitive plural to arrive at bonorum. Now that we've reviewed a little bit of noun-adjective agreement from Latin 1 with our first and second declension adjectives, take a moment to pause the video to copy down the endings for your third declension adjectives, adjectives that usually go is, in the nominative singular. Now that you've copied down all of your third declension adjective endings, a few things that I want to call your attention to when we're looking at third declension adjectives, and that is the masculine and feminine are almost always the exact same, and that's true whether it's singular or plural. So really, you're taking the masculine and you're just copying it over into the feminine. Now, the only exception to this is when you have words that give you three very different nominative singular forms. And here you'll see that the masculine nominative singular isn't this is, it's that er or a question mark form that we're used to from the third declension. And then the feminine acres and the neuter acre. So unless your dictionary entry of your adjective explicitly tells you that the masculine nominative singular will be something different than this is, just go ahead and remember that the masculine and feminine are almost always exactly the same. We can also see that these endings are very similar to our noun endings from third declension. So let's go ahead and sing that song to ourselves for our third declension endings. Blank is ema, wonder if you've heard. Ace, ibus, ace, and ibus, this declension's third. So apart from a few key exceptions, the nouns and the adjectives have very similar endings. One exception to note is this ablative singular ending. Instead of the typical E with no macron, we're actually going to copy the ablative from the dative, and these will be exactly the same. We also notice that at least on the plural side, there are the additions of a few I's, most notably in the genitive plural. Instead of just a UM ending, it's an IUM ending. And then instead of just an A for the neuters, all three of those forms that get copied for neuters are IA instead of the regular A. So when we're thinking about matching third declension adjectives, we do need to be a little bit more careful when the declensions match a third declension noun with a third declension adjective because we can't copy every single form. Sometimes we're going to have to think about what those differences are so that we make sure to write down the right adjective ending and not just copy blindly from the nouns. Four very common third declension adjectives that show up in Ecce Romani are omnis, omnes, omne, all or every, fortis, fortis, forte, brave and strong, brevis, brevis, breve, short, and acer, acris, acre, sharp. And apart from acer, acris, acre, which has a separate masculine, feminine, and neuter nominative singular, a lot of these words have the exact same ending for the masculine and the feminine, and so those will be the exact same form like we've discussed before. Other third declension adjectives that are going to appear later in Ecce Romani are ingens, ingentis, huge, and mirabilis, mirabilis, mirabile, wonderful or amazing. Now, mirabilis is like some of our other adjectives where the masculine and the feminine endings are exactly the same and only the neuter is different. But ingens, ingentis looks very much different from what we've seen before, and that's because this word will only have one set of endings. The masculine, feminine, and neuters are all exactly the same. This second form is actually to show you that there's a spelling change in the genitive singular. So this is actually a bit more like a noun dictionary entry where you have the nominative singular form for the adjective followed by the genitive singular form for an adjective. And that's to show you the spelling change. So once again, we're going to practice making our adjectives agree with our nouns by first identifying the declension of the adjective and of the noun to see if we can copy or not. If we can't copy, we're going to think about the case number and gender of the noun, and then we're going to change the ending of the adjective to match the noun and keep it in the same case, gender, and number. And we're going to practice using the adjective fortis, fortis, forte, brave. So once again, after each noun, make sure to pause the video so that you can figure out the form of fortis that's going to agree with each of these nouns. And our first noun is matris. Now, fortis, fortis, forte is a third declension adjective, as is matris. That means that we should be able to just copy the ending that we see on matris onto our third declension adjective. Now, remember that we want to be a little bit more careful with third declension adjectives because sometimes we have endings that are not exactly the same as the nouns, but this ending is not one of the ones that we need to watch out for. So as we go through, our ending will be fortis, a brave mother in the genitive, singular, and feminine. Go ahead and try our next noun, patribus. Now, once again, fortis, fortis, forte is a third declension adjective, and patribus is also a third declension noun. So we should be able to just copy the ending that we see on patribus onto our adjective fortis to be left with fortibus. Try pueros. Now, unfortunately here, since fortis is a third declension adjective, pueros is in fact a second declension noun, which means that we cannot copy and we need to think about the case, gender, and number. The os in second declension is an accusative and plural ending, and then boys are, of course, masculine. So we want to go to the masculine options for our third declension adjective and find the same case, the accusative plural, and we're left with fortes, where this es ending is an accusative plural, and masculine ending on our third declension adjective. Now if we have pueros fortes, brave boys, both pueros and fortes are accusative, plural, and masculine. Our last example, try puella. Now, once again, fortis is a third declension adjective, and this A with a macron tells me that puella is a first declension noun, which means we cannot copy, and we need to think about what case, gender, and number puella is, and that A with a macron can be nothing other than the ablative case in the singular. Girls are normally feminine, so we need to take the adjective fortis and change it to the ablative singular and feminine. And this is what I'm talking about when I say beware of the changes that are in third declension adjectives, because we should expect something like forte. That's the ending that we would expect if this were a third declension noun, but in third declension adjectives, they don't actually use that E ending, and instead they use an I with a macron for the ablative singular, and our form is forti. So remember to watch out when we're working with third declension adjectives, because they're not always identical to the third declension noun endings that we know from our songs. So just to repeat myself, remember that if you know how to identify what declension your adjective and your noun are in, if they're the same, you can almost always just copy the ending. It's when they're different that we need to be a little bit more wary, and we need to think about case, gender, and number. And then, of course, when we're working specifically with third declension nouns, remember that in the ablative singular, the genitive plural, and then the neuter plurals in the nominative, accusative, and vocative, we're going to be working with an I instead of the normal endings, either an I in place of the normal ending, or we're going to take that ending like the genitive plural and add an I before it. That's all for noun and adjective agreement working with third declension adjectives. Make sure to fill out that Google form as a comprehension exercise, and good luck on your practice. Walete to Skipoli.